If you're familiar with Star Wars, you'll obviously be familiar with the Sith. They're the big baddies and constant thorn in the Jedi's side for as long as there's been a Star Wars and probably a galaxy. In case you aren't aware, a lot of training actually goes into becoming a Sith. Some of it is even similar to the Jedi Order in terms of techniques, and some of it of course not so much. So today we're going to cover some of those unknown training tips and quirks that would lead us into the Sith and the dark side. So despite being the titular enemies of the Jedi, the Sith was not the only dark side and force-sensitive religion in the game. The Sith were originally rogue Jedi who encountered the native Sith species, yes it is a species, during the 100-Year Darkness. Through a combination of Sith philosophy and rogue Jedi ideology, they created a new force-sensitive cult that adhered to the dark side teachings. This cult went on to become the Sith that we know and love today, but other philosophies arose alongside it, forcing them to compete for acolytes. Notable examples of these other philosophies are the Nadists, who were a cult that worshipped Dark Lord Freedon Nad, and the disciples of Ragnos, who wanted to resurrect the Sith Lord Marka Ragnos to have him take over the galaxy. Think of it a bit like different denominations within Christianity, if Christianity was the dark side. One of the more interesting bits about historical Sith training is that prior to the Rule of Two and the Rule of One, Sith trained their apprentices in school-like academies that saw their heyday during the Jedi Civil War. The most famous of these academies was located on Moraband in the Valley of the Dark Lords, and it simultaneously functioned as both a training ground for potential students, while acting also as a jail for political prisoners. To be admitted into the academy, potential Sith had to impress current teachers or students to receive a medallion of submission. They could also kill a current student to take theirs, because they're a little ruthless, obviously. Competition was brutal even once inside the academy, and students were encouraged to fight each other for prestige. Naturally, because of this, there was intense rivalry among the students, and it often resulted in the death of fellow acolytes. The Code of the Sith, also known as Quatsasajak, was a core part of Sith training, and that tied into their central philosophy. It was almost a direct inversion of the Jedi Code. The full mantra goes, "Peace is a lie, there's only passion. Through passion I gain strength, through strength I gain power, through power I gain victory, and through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me." One of the cornerstones of this code was that emotion was power. Specifically, negative emotions, such as fear, anger, and pain, when harnessed, could help the individual achieve a transcendent state of being.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
One of the Sith's core beliefs when training students was that conflict was the truest test of a person's abilities, and that through conflict both civilizations and individuals were able to evolve. And they also believed conflict enhanced strong opponents while simultaneously weeding out the weak. Morality over this conflict often got in the way of opportunity for personal advancement. As such, they often urged their pupils to go the bloodier route when resolving disagreements. You might be familiar with the so-called Rule of Two.
Always two there are. No more, no less.
But it's not really explored much in the films, and although this rule was not always in place, as its more recent Sith invention considering how long their history actually is, the Rule of Two was created by Darth Bane to get rid of Sith infighting, and he stated that there should only ever be two Sith at any given time, a master and their apprentice. If the master was weak, then they should be overthrown by their apprentice. And if the apprentice was weak, then they should be replaced by a more worthy recruit. This process was designed to purify the Sith ranks by making them stronger, while giving Sith and their valued ambition a sort of code to follow. Of course, if you have a Rule of Two, then there's obviously a counter, which is the Rule of One. It's closely related, but definitely antagonistic towards its teachings. The Rule of One was the guiding tenet of the One Sith belief created by Darth Krayt after the collapse of the Sith Lords. In Star Wars Legends, it was explained as thus: there's a single Dark Lord and plus many lesser lords along with their minions and acolytes. This web of power is held together by fanatical loyalty to the Dark Lord, the one person, who under the teachings of the Rule of One is supposed to keep the Sith in line as a cohesive entity. It was essentially a competing alternative answer to the age-old question of how do we stop the Sith from infighting and destroying themselves? The Weakness of Inferiors was a seminal piece of Sith literature in the second volume in Emperor Palpatine's manifesto. Yes, did you know he had a manifesto? He did. It became part of his methodology for teaching new acolytes, and in his manifesto he talked about controlling the innocent, the ignorant, and the inferior without violence. This volume also covered 4 crucial tenets. All power coming from the outside is weak, the face of authority, the law of fear, and the weak do not understand the Force. As such, the manifesto makes the list because it is notably divergent from traditional Sith teachings, which often emphasize subjugation of the weak through brute force instead of tactful manipulation. The Sith had a clearly defined hierarchy, and while the definitions of these individual roles within this hierarchy did of course lead to in-canon conflict, no one can agree on anything it seems, I think it's important to briefly mention a few of the more interesting aspects of the hierarchy. One of these, of course, were the Sith Marauders, whose training was often brutal and emphasized by aggressive lightsaber combat. They didn't even focus on the Force too much, but in combat they could enter almost a berserker-like state that was fueled by their dark side emotions, and they were also notable for their inclination to commit war crimes. And another very interesting rank to come out of this specialized Sith training at the height of the Galactic Empire were the Inquisitorius. These were dark side users who were recruited by Palpatine to hunt down the last of the Jedi Purge survivors. Sound a little familiar? The Inquisitors were specifically trained in locating other Force users, and they played a pivotal role in preventing Force-sensitive children from becoming Jedi, and their most famous member was the Grand Inquisitor, former Jedi Temple Guard. Last on our list is the Sacrifice. The Sacrifice is a crucial piece of Sith training. It's not so much a training method as it is a test of one's dedication to the dark side. The Sacrifice varied depending on the individual acolyte, but the basic tenet was that the apprentice had to sacrifice their strongest emotional attachment in order to become stronger. The Sacrifice often took the form of an apprentice killing a loved one, and this particular form of training actually survived past the end of the Sith Order and Palpatine's reign. The most recent example that we've seen is of course Kylo Ren and his master Snoke, who commands him to kill his father and then later Rey in order to complete his training, and we all know how that went. And that's it for our list of 10 things you didn't know about Sith training. Think something else should be added to the list? Want us to cover it? Let us know in the comment section below, and if you like our video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. Once again, I'm Casey, and until next time, feel the power of the dark side. Raw.